Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Hustle Footy. It's your boy Ray, and tonight I've got Mac with me. Welcome, Mac.
Good evening.
Tonight we're going to be going over the games from the midweek Champions League semifinal action, and we'll also chat about the ongoing action in the Premier League. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at @houseof_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. All right, Mac, we'll start off with this first game of the semifinals, and that was Bayern Munich against Real Madrid, two of the teams that are favored to win this competition this year. I guess basically whoever wins this game is expected to go through and win against the other leg. So we'll start off here. 2-2 match that had a lot of action. So, Mac, I'll toss it to you first. What were your overall takes from this result?
If I'm a Bayern Munich fan, I'm disappointed. Here's the reason why. I think that over the course of play, you're the better team. I feel like your manager coached a better game. He made better decisions. He made definitely more braver decisions, especially with the substitution at halftime of Leon Goretzka to bring in Rafael Guerrero, which I thought was a very brave decision. Arguably, there's nothing wrong with what Goretzka was doing, but just having a different vibe, that change, switching over Musiala and Leroy Sané to be able to exploit some of what Real Madrid was doing. I would argue, especially after coming back and going up to 1, and that Eric Dyer header that should have gone in. Lunin made a decent save, but if that goes half a foot either direction further, it's not going to be saved by Lunin, which then Bayern at 3-1 feel comfortable, I feel like, and going away to the Bernabeu would have been felt very confident coming through. Whereas now, of course, how everything's mapped out, 2-2 result, it didn't go the way you want, and now you have to go away and hope to get a result. I think it's possible, but over the course of this game, looking at everything played out, if I'm Bayern Munich fan, I'm very disappointed and feel kind of a little bit hard done by. However, on the other end, if I'm Real Madrid, I would argue I didn't play that well. I had a couple of great performances. Toni Kroos obviously was absolutely phenomenal. Vinicius did what he needed to do, but across the pitch otherwise, Rodrigo was nothing. Jude Bellingham was nothing. Like defensively, you had some couple solid performances, but you didn't do much offensively. You walked away with a 2-2 result, and you're still going home with a great chance to get through to the final. So that's my initial takeaways from my overall thoughts on the match. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's new. This is Real Madrid in the Champions League. They don't need to play exceptionally well, have a couple of, like you said, standout performers, and ensure that you don't lose away. Or if you do lose, you don't lose heavily, which, like you said, they could have, and Bayern definitely created enough, you would argue, to definitely get a couple more goals. But ultimately, we can definitely break down situations and periods, and definitely the period after Bayern claw themselves back, make it 2-1, and Madrid are it's kind of now, okay, Madrid, let's see what you're made out of. You have to come and attack us. Bayern are comfortable in possession, string a couple passes, and are able to sort of open Madrid up, but are unfortunately unable to make those chances count. And of course, we know the Rodrigo penalty that Vinicius converts makes it a tie game. I mean, it's kind of what I would have expected for Real Madrid, and that's why you kind of favored them now that they're going to be at home for the second leg in a level playing field. But if Real Madrid are going to sort of sit off of Leroy Sané and Musiala in this competition, where individual performers and individual moments can really change the game, it could still very much so be Bayern's chance to go through. We know Harry Kane, although he converted the penalty, but he didn't, I think, get too many clear-cut chances. If he gets one, I don't want to talk about the Dortmund game too early, but if he gets a chance like the one that Fulkrug puts away, I'm very much back Harry Kane to make those count at the Bernabeu. So very much in the balance. Like you said, though, let's go straight into sort of the options, the formations, and sort of the key matchups there. I mean, Toni Kroos rolling back the years against his former team. Have to shout him up there. On the flip side, Kim Min-jae had one of the worst games, you could say, individually, especially in this late into the competition. The only one that really sticks out to me would be the Loris Karius Champions League final blunders that he had. So it's on that level. Unfortunately for him, it really came down to his mistake for the first goal, which up to that point, Madrid didn't create too much. Great little run by Vinicius, and then of course him bringing down Rodrigo there. I guess from here, is there something that really stood out to you in terms of the matchups, in terms of how the game played out in between these two teams, Mac?
For one, to talk about I think it's a little bit harsh. I don't think it's bad as Curious. I don't think it's actually anywhere near Curious.
No, for sure.
Not that egregious. No. But they were two decisions, and Thomas Tuchel even said after the game is where he got a little too greedy, right? And we got too greedy in two situations, and those are clear mistakes. It's not as if there was a moment of brilliance, other than the pass from Toni Kroos. I think that is a moment of brilliance, recognizing that. But you see the reaction from Thomas Muller, which I think is going to be a great long-standing meme of Toni Kroos celebrating the pass, and of course Muller coming out of the side, what the fuck, it exactly feels like that was a horrible decision, because the whole game plan for both teams, I felt like, in a lot of the ways, and it was to the advantage where you had the opportunity for these deeper lying playmakers, if it's Toni Kroos and Guerrero coming on in the second half, to be able to do that for Bayern Munich, where they are afforded a lot of time on the pitch, because both these teams, I would argue, are not high pressing. They're not trying to win the ball back necessarily in the final third. They're more so, okay, we want to see if we can absorb pressure and have in our certain moments of quality either play well in transition, which to Real Madrid's credit, that's how they got their first goal, and see if we're able to create some opportunities from that manner. So for Kim to naively fall into that trap, it was a little bit unfortunate. You do argue maybe he should have got a little bit support, a little bit more cover. Kimmich up to that point was doing well, helping to be able to step in. Eric Dyer's generally not the fleetest of foot, so even if he has a half leg up on Vinicius, he's still never going to catch him. So even though, yes, Kim, poor individual moments, you definitely felt like that was the game plan going in, and him kind of reverting from that game plan is what cost them. Though individual matchups wise, I do think that going into the reverse fixture, we may see something very, very much play out on the other end of the spectrum, because, as I said, both teams are very comfortable out of possession. They don't necessarily want the ball. The best moments from Bayern Munich that we've seen thus far this season, the best game I've seen them play, and I'll be frank with you, I've watched maybe a dozen games, so it's not been too many, but their best game was against Arsenal when they played away at the Emirates, where they're sound enough defensively and play well enough in transition. And we saw glimpses of that in this matchup, and away at the Bernabeu. That's what's probably in all likely expected to do, because I don't think Real Madrid can be with that fan playing at home under that type of pressure. If they go 60 minutes in and they're not possessing the ball, they're not aggressive, they're not creating opportunities, their fans are going to get on them, because that's the expectation of what a Real Madrid team is expected to do. So I think that matchup on the other leg, that actually might favor Bayern, just like it did against Arsenal. I think what will be interesting on the other side, and what Real Madrid may be able to take advantage of, is where they noticed that switch, and what I brought up earlier was the Leroy Sané Musiala switch on different wings, and how are they able to expose different types of problems. Where Real Madrid, which you probably watch them a lot more than I do, Carvajal, Vasquez, Valverde, that whoever's playing in the right back and the right wing position, who's more forward, who's more back, covering a pacey Leroy Sané. They did such a great job at managing that situation and making sure that at every single time they were doubling up on him. And even though Vasquez in this case would come up and join the attack, he was still quick enough to get back after Valverde was doing his cover to double up on Sané. When that switch occurred and Musiala is naturally going to flow more into the central position, that's where you saw Bayern Munich start to play better. So Real Madrid in a reverse fixture, okay, we've seen this adjustment. We already have their game plan of how they're going to do it. What do they bring to the table to be able to help kind of combat that? Because I'll be frank with you, on the left-hand side for Real Madrid, not the greatest. Mendy, if Rodrigo's playing out there, they're not doing anything really to stop Sané in transition. So they know the game plan of how Bayern Munich got back into the game. So maybe they kind of can get ready for those adjustments. So I think it's still, even though we are going to favor Real Madrid in all likelihood, I think based off understanding the matchups, based off kind of how the flow of this game, this still is very much for me, preferable coin toss, where because of the situation, because of the matchups, I think Bayern Munich have just as good of a chance as Real Madrid to come out and reach the final.
I agree, and like you said, there's definitely a game plan there for Bayern to sort of exploit. Like you said, the left-hand side for Real Madrid, Son is just too good, too quick, and if he's on one of those moods, if you kind of get, I you know how I feel about Thomas Muller. I love Thomas Muller, but I'm kind of thinking, why don't you sort of bring Musiala more into the middle. He can kind of link up with Sane on that left hand side, kind of maybe like how Arsenal have Odegaard and Saka, where quick interchanges, you draw defenders in, and then you either switch to the next side, or because you're so good, you just play between those little triangles that maybe Kane himself can join as well, and sort of beat Madrid down that left hand side, and hopefully create from there and score your chances. On the flip side, though,
I want to jump in on that because I think it's very important what you brought up with Muller. I think what Muller wanted to do was very similar to what Vinicius did to Kim. His whole goal, and he was talking about it in the post-match, you're speaking in German, so I'm not a translator, this is what the translator was saying, is that his whole goal was to be able to make sure that either Rudiger or Nacho were stepping out. And the way that he was playing alongside Kane and dropping off and dragging some of there, Musiala, I don't think really necessarily does that as well. He's more naturally just, I'm going to stay close to the ball anyway. He's going to get closer. The more central he is, I feel like, the closer he is to the defensive mid position versus if you stick him out wide, then he's coming inside. It's going to create a little bit more disruption. And that will, by Muller doing that, it's going to allow either a Musiala or a Sane to be able to come in. The difference was, even though Rudiger seems like an agent of chaos, he didn't allow or fall into that trap. And very same thing there. Very disciplined in those decisions. So I like the attempt, and I think it could have worked well, and that's why it worked better in the second half. But I apologize, I interrupted you.
No, that's a great shout. I mean, I'm very interested because, as we know, Thomas Tuchel has won a Champions League at club level. So, of course, as a manager. So I'm interested to see how that will look like. On the flip side, though, like you said, Jude Bellingham, Rodrigo, apart from him drawing that penalty, definitely did not have a great game. So I'm expecting, and I did keep an eye out on sort of their how they played over that last weekend. A lot of rotation. So I expected Jude Bellingham and Rodrigo to be both fresh and ready for this game. I'm expecting them, though, to step up in the next tie. And of course, if you have those chances, I definitely do back Bellingham, Rodrigo, and Vinicius Jr. to at least put one or two away in the reverse tie. So again, a lot to watch out for. Ancelotti as well. I'm very interested to see what will happen. I definitely think that we'll see Carvajal come back because he was suspended for this match. But will we see Eder Militao starting instead of Nacho? Will Tchouaméni play more as a center back the way he was asked to do later in this game? A lot of questions there. So let's keep an eye on that. Let's move on then back to the next match. That was Borussia Dortmund against PSG. Dortmund winning 1-0 against PSG, and I think kind of a shock result, although it is just the first leg. Dortmund did well enough, of course, to take their chances, although they could have had a couple more. PSG, though, had their fair chances themselves, and it looked like, surprise, surprise, they're kind of missing a striker. Of course, we know Mbappe is the main star, main guy there, but it feels like to me they're lacking a very much like Dortmund have a out-and-out striker like Fulkrug who just be clinical, doesn't really care what the nice interchanging plays happen. Put the ball over the top, let me run onto it, I'm going to finish it. So that, I think, was ultimately the separator for this game. Of course, a lot to play for, but Mac, what were your takes from this game?
I don't mean to kind of throw blame on one individual, but I think just like how Thomas Tuchel, he didn't get the win that he was looking for, but did an excellent job as a manager and as coach. I think you can kind of throw the blame on Luis Enrique in terms of PSG's setup for this game. I know more recently, and to explain why, their how they built up from the back and their lineup, you can kind of bake in where understand Mbappe's playing more as a striker, you have Barcola and Dembele out on each wing. But the more and more we watch this turn out and watch this play, the more and more you realize that Mbappe really isn't that guy as a striker. And I went back and actually watched, because this is the third matchup that this team has played each other in the Champions League, because they have first two games in the group stage. And PSG, up till this one, were undefeated. They won at Paris and then tied away in Germany. So you think that going into the matchup, they should be feel somewhat comfortable. But the difference was in between those games, and what I took away was the striker for who they started for both those games was Colomwani. It was not Mbappe. Barcola was on the bench, and Mbappe started on the wing. And you notice, and I went back and watched those highlights of those matches, the amount of times, because in transitional moments, Mbappe was able to get isolated out wide and create opportunities for himself or his teammates. I think he ended up sticking the penalty away in the first fixture. but he had more influence on the game. Whereas in this matchup, aside from hitting in the post, which I think that was as hectic of a moment you could have, where either hit the post and then Vitinha hit the post, I think it was right afterwards. Aside from that, he was really invisible. The main creator was Dembele, who did a great job, but again, if you're just relying on him to be kind of the straw that stirs the drink, I think you would want a little bit more from a semifinals Champions League team. So again, I feel like Enrique could have made certain adjustments to make his team a little bit better and a little bit on set where maybe you expect to go into the game where, okay, we're playing away at Dortmund, they may have more of the ball, they may feel more comfortable, we want to be able to get them on the counterattack. But it ended up being the other way around. They had much more of the possession. They actually had more shots. They just weren't clinical in those moments. And you can notice that Dortmund did such a great job of building a wall in and around their box, but really it felt like it was a 4-5-1 with Füllkrug out top. And he even came back, and it was a lot of times 11 behind the ball. So again, I would argue poor on Enrique. And even though he didn't, this game plan didn't work in this matchup, I think if we look at the reverse fixture, he could make those adjustments. He can make those changes and fix it. And sorry, do you have any thoughts on PSG? How do you feel about this game?
Yeah, I mean, the adjustments are going to have to be made for sure at the center back position with Lucas Hernandez going off. Of course, it come out that he suffered an ACL injury, will miss the rest of the season, and of course the Euro. So very, very unfortunate for him. I think he also missed the World Cup last time out. Got injured, I think, the very first game of the World Cup. So really unfortunate for him, and wish him the best recovery there. But yeah, like you already pointed out how PSG can sort of switch things up. And I really wanted to emphasize how well Dortmund did defensively. They knew that if you throw bodies in front of Mbappe and Dembele, their midfield, I think, is a good midfield, but I don't think they have. Of course, you can't really compare them to your Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets type of midfield, or even the Cruz and Modric midfield, where they just have that quality to unlock defenses. They're really relying on the forwards, Mbappe, Dembele, and whoever it is that they do decide to start up there. So I'm interested to see how they do switch that around. You're right. Mbappe and Hakimi had those chances where they hit the posts back to back. But apart from that, it's tough. It's tough to see how they were gonna get their goal in this game. On the flip side, though, of course, we have to talk about the Füllkrug goal where he has, I think, couldn't have asked for a better touch to set that up. Of course, the ball over the top from Schlotterbeck, catching out a PSG defense that, if you know that that's a threat, and I just don't understand why PSG defense is so high up. Of course, they were punished, but could Donnarumma have done better for that goal? I think it was a great strike. So I would feel that Donnarumma could have done a little bit better, but I wouldn't really put it down on him. What are your thoughts from that goal, Mac?
Well, you want to give credit to Füllkrug because I think the separator of why Donnarumma didn't do as well as he should have is because the speed at which he takes it. Where Füllkrug on the second touch strikes the ball versus Donnarumma probably anticipated that, maybe I can take a couple more steps out, close up the angle, and that's why he's not on his toes to be able to react and drop down to be able to make the save. But I feel like it's so close to them. He could have done a better job if he, again, anticipated that's what Füllkrug was doing, but great credit to Füllkrug. I think, though, what Dortmund did well, aside from the defensive portion, is they did create a couple of other opportunities. And, of course, it won't be a Champions League podcast, but unless we bring up how well Jadon Sancho's playing, right?
Of course.
How well he's playing with Dortmund. I think that he had completed 13 take-ons, and that was the most in a semifinal Champions League game since Messi. And I think the only player in the Champions League history to have more is actually Neymar, who had 14 and a couple of times. So he's putting himself up there in terms of the games to games. And a couple of times he actually teed up Füllkrug to score again. And so if you're Dortmund, even though you're fortunate not to concede in kind of the dose post action at one point, you probably are also at the same time disappointed that Füllkrug didn't net a couple more goals because he should have had a hat-trick. So it ends up being where it evens out where Dortmund deserved that extra advantage, I would feel like, because they created maybe that one more opportunity that's a little bit more clear-cut, and how well they played defensively. But it'll be interesting to see how the game plans will adjust in the reverse fixture, where I would argue I think you're going to have very much a similar a game plan in terms of how Dortmund's going to play. But the adjustments from PSG, do they make them in the right areas of the pitch? Do they change the midfield that you talked about? Because even going back to the first game they played, I would argue their best player on the pitch was Vitinha. Well, he was able to get into the box. He ended up creating a goal for Hakimi in that game. And I think he was very much probably the player that was the key that unlocked a Dortmund team. But that was, again, the first group stage matchup of the Champions League season. That was months ago. It's actually closer to next season than it will be towards that from that game. So
That's right.
This Dortmund team has changed substantially. However, I feel like the PSG team hasn't, where the only change really has been the Mbappe, Barcola, instead of playing Koulibaly. So does he come back in? Does Vitinha see more of an advanced role because you now can anticipate you're going to have a much heavier amount of possession? I think that's interesting. The last piece, I think, is where I would argue, again, Füllkrug's probably a little bit fortunate to be able to he's not blessed with pace. I can say that because I'm also not throwing any stones. But it would be interesting going into the next game where instead of him starting up front, do they do what PSG was trying to do in this game? Where instead, do you see maybe Adeyemi starting in a striker position? Or do you see maybe a Marco Reus coming in on that wing position to help retain control and possession? Because he, again, in the first game, all the way back at the beginning of this year, he's actually started, but he's been more so coming off the bench recently. So again, I think it'll be interesting the changes that these teams do make, because with it still being so close, just like in the other fixture, we're potentially teed up for two very exciting games.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough for PSG, and you're right. They're lucky not to have conceded more. A couple chances from Füllkrug. Sabitzer hit the bar, I believe, could have made it 2-0. And then Marquinhos with that fantastic block on Julian Brandt as well towards the end of the game. Could have been a different game. So PSG, it's up to you now. You're at home. Kind of have to prove yourself and see if Mbappe, if this is his year to sort of leave PSG with sort of a dynasty there that he's built. So we'll keep an eye out for that. We'll take a quick break here, and then we'll be back covering some more Premier League action. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to Hustle Footy, guys. We are going to continue now discussing some action that took place on the day of recording. That's Thursday. And that's, of course, the Chelsea against Spurs game where Chelsea won 2-0. And, of course, our boy, Cole Palmer, returned to this game and didn't really have too much of an effect in terms of the scoreline. But Nicholas Jackson, very early on, could have made it 1-0 for Chelsea. I was thinking, would they come back and sort of look back at that situation and think maybe we should have taken that chance because Spurs, they do have some threat going forward. It didn't turn out like that. Chelsea ultimately were able to create more chances, get the 2-0 win, and even let Nicholas Jackson score at the end, towards the end, actually. So, Mac, what were your overall takes from this game?
One, I think, again, return on Cole Palmer makes a lot of sense. I actually think the big plus is actually some big people view it as a negative towards Chelsea, where Enzo Fernandez, as soon as he leaves the team, it feels like more pieces fall into place and fit more naturally together. And what I mean by this is where the midfield duo between Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez, it kind of felt like this is definitely, there's different levels of this. And let me finish my analogy before you roast me from the analogy. It's like the first season of LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, where they're all just like passing each other and they're trying to figure out, no, it's your team, no, it's your team, no, it's your team, no, it's your team. Versus like, okay, guys, let's just figure this fuck out and figure out how we need to be able to play together to be successful. Caicedo and Fernandez aren't those players. The point being. But they haven't figured out a way to play together successfully because there's so much pressure on them to be successful, considering how much the team has given up for them to be able to fit together. Whereas if Caicedo's slotting along Gallagher, he's like, oh, I know what Gallagher's going to do. He's going to run around like a chicken with his head cut off, jump into stupid tackles, and it's fine. I need to sit here no matter what. I'm going to cover my position. And I felt like this may have been one of his better games in a Chelsea shirt. What that also does, it allows, because Gallagher has been one of the better players, and I would argue he's not naturally in a front four attacking role, even though Mudryk is hilariously awful in some moments, but also amazing in other. It allows more of a natural winger to come on the pitch, where for me, that front four for Chelsea, except for maybe if Nicholas Jackson, figured out how to shoot, that front four makes sense on paper to me. Where Madueke with his pace, being able to go both right and left, Mudryk be able to go both right and left, and sometimes and Cole Palmer just pulling the strings. For me, that front four makes so much more sense. So it's weird that kind of you take a player away and felt like the chips fell into place for Chelsea, and that's why they came out with the win. Where even though again Tottenham had more possession, you may argue they had more shots in total. It never felt like they were in control of the game, dictating tempo and creating opportunities all at the same time. It felt like they could have the ball and not really do anything with it. But then once Chelsea did, they knew what they were doing and they were getting on the front foot. They knew who to attack. So that's what I was a little bit more excited about. On the other side, for Spurs, I think we may start to see Ange Postecoglou crack a little bit. When you saw him, the clip that's going around right now is what stop passing it fucking backwards is driving a lot of him a little bit mental, where maybe he's not used to this level of, let's say, consistent 4-4-2 lineups where out of possession, you just kind of, we're going to make sure that they can't beat us, they can't get through us. And Tottenham haven't figured out a way to be able to kind of break those lines against these higher level, quote unquote, higher level teams. So hopefully that's something they can fix. Is that a change in rotation? They did have the rotation in this game, but and you still saw some moments of potential from some of their players, but definitely Chelsea deserved to win based off the balance of play. What about you? What are your initial takeaways from this game?
Well, Chelsea, surprising the way sort of they're finishing the season. I think, of course, the Arsenal result is something that is an anomaly, and they definitely do not expect to. You can't really expect to judge them on that, but there has been a little bit of an improvement in terms of their performances, and I think we even kind of predicted. I mean, I very much was taking a reserve spot and predicting the result for this game, but I think you're right in saying that Chelsea at least have they look cohesive at the moment. Spurs definitely not in the best run of form currently, so it's kind of clicking into in the perfect time, if there's a perfect time for Chelsea, because they're now up to 8th, and Cole Palmer now, like we know, he is the focus of the team. I think it's to the detriment of the team, though, because I think Cole Palmer is still so used to playing with the quality of players that he had at Man City, where there was a lot of rotation for both teams. And there was a passage in play where he gets the ball, he makes a couple of passes. You would think Chelsea now can settle into a good bit of possession inside the Spurs half. He makes a pass backwards that sort of puts his defense under pressure, and then Spurs get a counter from that. Ultimately, Spurs weren't able to do much from that opportunity, but it still shows us that, yes, Chelsea have gotten better, but there are still some questions to be solved there. But ultimately, they got the win at home, and that also, of course, means as well Spurs have lost against Chelsea both home and away this season. So that's a huge dent on how well Spurs started this season. And we talked about it, and we're going to go into a little bit of a preview in terms of their next game. But I do have to, again, shout out Chelsea with regards to the way they're able to at least get the results. Spurs, though, can't defend from set pieces yet again. Chalba getting a free header from a free kick that's taken from the halfway line. That should never happen. And, of course, you're conceding another set piece where Cole Palmer hits the post from the free kick. Nicholas Jackson finds himself open where you really expect at least someone to put to put a foot in. My concern is the goal scoring for Spurs as well, where Richarlison started this game, but eventually came off, not really having an impact in this game. And so what does that mean moving forward? I mean, we can predict it a little bit more and talk about their next fixture, which is against Liverpool, but that's another concern of mine. But I think we should talk about what this means in terms of the European qualifications, Max. So I'm going to toss it to you. Can you kind of give us a rundown on what the running could look like for not just the 4th place top 4, but potentially the top 6, top 7?
Absolutely. First, before I jump into that, I just want to highlight in terms of Spurs, and I think in terms of you brought up with the Charleston, where Ange Postecoglou, he's searching for something to work, right? Where you saw like James Maddison to be able to start last game. You've seen Timo Werner be able to come in to be able to start games more recently in the midfield with Sarr, Basuma, Højbjerg. It's like he's trying to figure out what works. Is Kulusevski a 10? Is he more of the right winger? Brendan Johnson, has he been more a left winger? He's been going right. There's been such a rotation of trying to figure it out, and you can kind of split and notice the first 10 games of the season, they actually had 26 points and were trending above what the invincible season for Arsenal was. So they're kind of off the gates flying. And that's really what's kind of set them up to still be in a conversation of being in a European spot. Because if we look at their last 10 games, and if you look at the form table, they've actually performed eighth best. And Chelsea have actually performed 1 point better in the last 10 games. So on form, they have been the better team. So again, fair credit to them. And that's why Chelsea, we're going to have that conversation. Can they finish in a European spot? And here's how it's breaking down as of right now. It's been confirmed that both Italy and Germany, hooray for the Axis powers, of course, they're going to be able to get the extra qualification spot for the Champions League next season. So what does that mean is top 4 for the Premier League, that's Champions League, 5th spot's Europa League, 6th spot's Conference League. The interesting situation is where another Europa League spot is open to the winner of the FA Cup. But if someone from the top 6 wins the FA Cup, then the 7th place team is then qualified. So theoretically, we may have a 6th place in the Europa League and 7th place is in the Conference League. What does that mean for Spurs? And somewhat in terms of a preview for Liverpool is, where does that game mean anything really to either team? Yes, because Spurs need to handle on that 5th spot as much as possible to at least guarantee a Europa League spot, worst case. But the important part for Chelsea picking up is where now they're 3 points adrift off Manchester United, who are 6th, and 2 points adrift of Newcastle, who are 7th. So if they win out the rest of the games and may finish above them, and Man City win the FA Cup, which they are the favorites to against Manchester United, that spot opens up for them to not be in the Conference League. Or if Manchester United win the FA Cup and finish, let's say, 6th, that opens up the 7th spot to the Conference League now. So there's so many ins and outs of what these teams are playing for, where that's why the last 10 games have been so important for Chelsea, where at least if they can scrape some European competition, the revenue that will help them help deal with all their debts that they've been doing and all the financial questions that have been asked of them and help them going forward. So it's still, for both these teams, even though it may seem like there's not much to play for, there's a lot to play for. It's very important that these last 4 games for each of them, they come out and perform at high levels.
So let's get straight into the preview. Of course, Liverpool are playing Spurs this weekend. And it's a game where 2 teams who are very much down on form are trying to get all 3 points here. And both teams can't really score, Max. So it's kind of tough to see sort of which offense is gonna reign the stronger team this game. I guess which team can create fewer mistakes. And being at Anfield, I really do have to side towards Liverpool. Maybe you can call it a bias, but I just think Liverpool having as well the rest from last weekend, of course, having essentially a full week's rest, whereas Spurs played against Arsenal, high intensity match. This one midweek would be another intense match that they had back to back, and now traveling to Anfield. I think it might be too much for them. And that being said, I don't really see, even though Liverpool are very susceptible to being scored on, I don't necessarily see a way for Spurs to really cause Liverpool really problems, because there's no real focus point. There's no, at this point, it doesn't seem like there is a player that's in good enough form for Spurs up front that will cause problems for Liverpool. But of course, that means Richarlison's going to score a hat-trick at Anfield, and then we're going to forget about this. But Mac, what are your predictions for this upcoming game?
I think you're spot on. The key word there is mistakes. If you just look on the balance of form, playing at Anfield, arguably Spurs now losing 3 games in a row, and if they were to lose this game against Liverpool, it would be the longest losing streak this season in the Premier League for them. So that would be a huge downturn in form, and definitely will sour a lot of the taste of Spurs fans of Ange and his, I'd say, long-term plan going into the off-season. But that mistake word is going to be very, very key, because I would argue what has been susceptible and has been mistakes from Liverpool in their previous games, where it's the defensive miscues on the right-hand side and in transition and set pieces in some cases. So Liverpool, Spurs, I would argue, don't really excel in set pieces, but they do excel in transition. And that's probably their best avenue going forward. So I'll be very interested to see, is, as you brought up, I know you in a kind of backhanded way, which I'm all here for because I love Richarlison. But the interesting part of him starting as a striker, at least to occupy either who's going to start in that right center half position, if it be a Kwanzaa, if it be a Konate, to allow space for Son to be able to come on the left-hand side. And even though he hasn't had the greatest run of form these last couple of games, he's felt more invisible than he's ever really felt under playing for Spurs. I think if he has a good game, I think that is their best way to at least create other opportunities, as well as someone that came on as a substitute and hasn't hit his best form since coming back from injury would be James Maddison, creating in that midfield and potentially, if he can be able to get away from whoever's playing as a 6, if it be McAllister, Endo, and link play with either Richarlison or Son, that's probably their best shout in terms of creating opportunities and transition. Or again, set piece wise, I would argue the only one that can put any sort of quality delivery in the box from a Spurs team has been Maddison this year. So if he comes on, he starts. I think he needs to have a big game as well, Son, if Tottenham are going to have any chance.
Then I guess we're saying that there's going to be at least a couple of set piece chances conceded from both teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see at least maybe a couple of set piece goals. It's a tough one to see how it goes. Spurs definitely could use that the space that Liverpool afford other teams when they're sort of defending in transition. So that could be a big way for Spurs to get ahead. But I don't know, maybe Liverpool, some of their players could come back in form. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think this is what I thank you for bringing that up and bring it back in form. Something that we talked about in our last podcast, which would be very interesting. Does Salah start? Because he should be set up for a game of games. If he does, he should be back angry. He should be hungry. Because who started the fullback position for Spurs against Chelsea? Emerson. Both the fullbacks left fullbacks for Spurs are out injured with Udogie surgery. I think Ben Davies is also out injured. So that tees up for a Salah versus Emerson fullback battle. And I'll be frank with you, I might lean Salah being a little bit having a good day. So it should be easy cooking for him on that right-hand side. As well as Spurs, they're going to aggressively try to play out from the back. You don't see them going long a whole lot. And if you're playing, and let's be frank here, Emerson is not a left back. And I would argue, even though Bentancur, I think we've seen good moments from him, hasn't looked great in possession. So them trying to get out of possession from a Liverpool press, if they're intense enough, if they're quick enough, if they're smart enough, they should be able to feast on the Spurs back line with how things are set up right now. So I think that we may see a lot of opportunities for Liverpool to score. Will they finish? That's the separator. Yeah,
that's definitely something we'll keep an eye out on. Of course, the next match we'll preview before we finish our podcast is Chelsea, a team that we just spoke about. They are going to be facing West Ham at home this weekend. West Ham tied Liverpool last time out, actually, and beat Chelsea earlier this season with a red card in the second half. Final score was West Ham 3-1. Chelsea started the season awfully in terms of form and how they would have expected under Pochettino. But like we just spoke about, they are looking better and they're going to be wanting to get all 3 points here to continue their push. I think they are just above West Ham in terms of points, looking to chase down Newcastle and Man U. And honestly, I do have to give them the edge here. They're going to be home. They look like they have an idea of how they want to play. And West Ham, even though they did get a tie against Liverpool last time out, it wasn't the most convincing display from them. And again, concern about the number of games that those players have played with European commitments could be another concern for them. And I think it might just be a game too much. I'm counting Chelsea getting all 3 points here. Matt, what are your predictions?
So I hear you say that. The last time I boosted up Chelsea whatsoever, they came out and had a shambolic performance. So do I feel that confident? No, I don't whatsoever. However, I think this may be their next big hurdle because the last 4 games, they play at home against West Ham. They go away to Nottingham Forest, away to Brighton, at home to Bournemouth. So Brighton hasn't looked good towards the end of the season. Bournemouth have actually, on the form table the last 10 games, I think they're like the 3rd best team in the Premier League. They've been on fire. So if they're going to continue to claw back into a European position potentially, this game is vital, playing at home against a rival again. You need to come out and have an absolute banger of a performance to at least help potentially close the gap because the competition around you, being Manchester United, are playing Crystal Palace. Again, you never know what you should be able to get from them. But Palace should be beatable for a Manchester United team. And Newcastle, of course, is facing Burnley. So they need to at least keep level or keep pace with their competition if they're going to have any chance, if even some other things go their way. So I think this is a vital performance for Chelsea. And I think if they do manage to finish away between being 6th or 7th by the end of the year and get some sort of European competition next year, I think we might see kind of the reverse Ange Postecoglou, where towards the end of the season, his stock is dropped. We may see Pochettino's and his potential of staying at Chelsea for a longer time period increase. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited to see what happens. But again, last time I had any positive talk for Chelsea, they absolutely let me down. So I am not going to big them up in any way there.
Yeah, I mean, like you said it, you got it perfectly spot on. The last hurdle for Chelsea, they could finish this season with, if that's the last 5 games, 5 straight wins. And we forget about all the talk about, is Pochettino the right manager moving forward? Because of course there's going to be players coming back from injury. He can sort of shape this team a little bit more. Of course, a year under his belt at Chelsea, so a lot to look out for, and things could very much end positively for Chelsea, where the whole season they were kind of 10th to 12th position, maybe even lower at other points, and we had doubts about Pochettino, but now things have turned around. Chelsea FC or Cole Palmer FC have looked better towards the end of the season, so we'll keep an eye on that. Of course, then, this concludes our podcast for today. If you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at @house_of_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well. houseoffooty@hotmail.com is our email. The next time you hear from us will be early next week, when we'll be reviewing this weekend's action from the Premier League, and we'll tee up the second legs of the Champions League semifinals. Thank you, Matt, for joining me.
Peace out.
See you guys soon.